At dawn in the summer of 1829, the earth behind the Reed plantation did something no one could explain. It sighed. Not wind, not animals. A long, hollow breath, rising from the soil like the land itself was alive and tired of holding secrets. By nightfall, a man was missing. His name was Nathaniel Reed. No chains were found. No blood. No tracks leading into the trees. Just a shallow dip in the ground behind the tobacco fields, as if the land had opened its mouth and swallowed him whole. The overseer wrote it off as escape. That was the easiest lie. Enslaved men ran all the time, he said. But the dogs refused to track. They circled the dip, whining, then sat down. One of them began to dig, until it started screaming. That scream echoed through the fields long after the dog was dragged away. Nathaniel Reed had been quiet. Too quiet. He worked the night shift repairing foundations beneath the main house, crawling under rotting beams where spiders nested and rats watched with bright, knowing eyes. The plantation church stood above him. White walls, clean hymns, Sunday sermons about obedience and divine order. But beneath that church, the ground was wrong. Slaves whispered that Nathaniel had been listening to the soil, that he pressed his ear to the dirt and stayed there for hours, eyes closed, like he was waiting for something to speak back. They said he carved marks into the underside of floorboards, symbols no one recognized. Not African, not Christian, something older, something that looked like doors. The master's family noticed other things. Floorboards shifting, cold drafts rising through prayer benches, candles flickering when no windows were open. The church bell ringing once, alone, at midnight. After Nathaniel vanished, the ground behind the fields began to sink inch by inch, day after day, like a slow collapse no one wanted to see. The plantation records would later claim nothing unusual happened that year. But diaries tell a different story. They speak of sounds under the house, of footsteps moving where no one walked, of children waking up screaming about tunnels filled with hands pressing through dirt, still reaching. Nathaniel Reed did not escape. He went somewhere else. And whatever he built beneath that plantation was never meant to be found. This is not a story about freedom. It's a story about what happens when the buried decide to dig back. Nathaniel Reed was known for one strange habit. He never looked at the sky. Other men stole glances when they could. Quick looks at clouds, birds, anything that reminded them the world was bigger than fences and fields. Nathaniel didn't. His eyes stayed low, always on the ground, always watching where his feet landed, like he was afraid of stepping on the wrong place. People thought it was fear. They were wrong. Nathaniel had been born on the plantation. His mother died in the winter of 1809, buried without a marker near the tree line. As a child, Nathaniel used to sit by that patch of dirt for hours. Not crying, not praying, just listening. He said the ground remembered things. When he grew older, the overseers noticed he had a gift for repair work. Foundations, cellars, crawl spaces, anywhere dark and tight where other men panicked, Nathaniel stayed calm. He moved slowly, carefully, like he already knew the shape of the space before entering it. By 1827, he was assigned permanently beneath the main house in the church. That was when the headaches began. Nathaniel told another slave that the ground under the church pulsed at night, not like a heartbeat, but like breath. Long, uneven breaths, as if something buried deep was struggling to inhale through layers of dirt and wood. He started carving symbols where no one could see them, under floorboards, on support beams, lines and shapes that curved inward, always pointing down. He said they weren't words. They were instructions. At night, when the others slept, Nathaniel dug. Not wildly, not in desperation. This was careful work. Measured, quiet. He wrapped cloth around his tools to soften the sound. He moved soil into hidden gaps beneath the house, places already hollowed by age and rot. Weeks passed, then months. The tunnel didn't lead out. It led deeper. Nathaniel began refusing food. Said eating made it harder to hear. His eyes sank into his skull. His hands shook, not from weakness, but from holding something back. One night, the plantation preacher found him under the church, lying flat against the dirt, ear pressed to the ground. "What are you doing, boy?" he asked. Nathaniel answered without looking up. "It's almost ready." That was the first time anyone heard fear in the preacher's voice. Because Nathaniel smiled and said, very softly, "It's been waiting longer than all of us." The church was the first thing to change. At first, it was subtle. A crooked hymn board, a pew that leaned no matter how often it was straightened. The preacher blamed bad carpentry. The master blamed humidity. No one blamed the ground, because the ground was supposed to be silent, obedient, dead. But by early spring of 1829, the church floor dipped near the altar. Just a little. Enough that people felt it in their knees when they prayed. Enough that candles dripped unevenly, wax crawling sideways like it was trying to escape. Nathaniel noticed before anyone else. He warned them. He told the other slaves not to stand near the altar, said the ground there was thinning, like skin worn too long over bone. They laughed nervously and told him to stop talking like an old man. That night, the bell rang. Once. No rope was pulled. No wind moved. The sound came from inside the bell itself, dull, heavy, like it had been struck from below. The preacher woke the master. The master woke the overseer. They searched the church with lanterns, boots thudding on warped boards. Beneath the altar, they found fresh cracks in the floor. And something else. A smell. Not rot. Not mold. Warm dirt. Like earth that had just been turned by living hands. Nathaniel was questioned the next morning. Beaten for answers he did not give. He only said the ground was shifting because it was being asked to remember. That word, remember, made the overseer strike him harder. By summer, the church leaned visibly to the east. Sermons grew shorter. Attendance thinned. People complained of dizziness, of hearing whispers during prayer that didn't match the preacher's voice. Children said the floor hummed. Nathaniel kept digging. He worked longer hours beneath the building, emerging coated in soil, eyes glassy, mouth moving as if repeating something over and over. One man swore he heard Nathaniel arguing with someone underground, pausing, listening, then answering back. The night before Nathaniel disappeared, the church sank another inch. No one slept. And beneath the altar, far below where foundations should have ended, a tunnel finally broke through into open space. A space that was already there, waiting. The ground didn't collapse. It opened. And for the first time in generations, something buried very deep took a full breath. The tunnel Nathaniel built was never meant to lead outside. That truth terrified them more than escape ever could. When the overseer finally forced two men to crawl beneath the church after Nathaniel vanished, they expected to find a crude passage, ragged walls, clawed dirt, desperation carved into soil. They found none of that. The tunnel was smooth, not polished, but shaped. The walls curved gently inward, like the inside of a throat. Tool marks were present, but faint, almost respectful, as if Nathaniel hadn't been forcing the earth apart, but following lines that were already there. And the air was warm. Too warm for underground. It carried a low vibration that settled into the chest and made breathing feel heavy, deliberate. Each inhale felt borrowed. The tunnel sloped downward, not straight, but spiraling slowly, endlessly. No supports, no beams. Yet nothing collapsed. The dirt held itself together, firm and patient. After 50 feet, the men refused to go farther. They said the darkness ahead wasn't empty, that it had weight, that their lantern light bent strangely, fading faster than it should, like something ahead was drinking it in. One man claimed he heard humming. Not a song, not words, a rhythm. The overseer struck him for lying, then looked down the tunnel himself. He later wrote that he felt watched, not from ahead, but from below, as if the ground beneath the tunnel floor was listening upward. The entrance was sealed that same day. Boards, nails, concrete mixed by hand. The church altar was rebuilt thicker, heavier, as if weight could crush what waited underneath. But the sounds didn't stop. At night, the ground tapped back. 3 slow knocks. Then silence. The slaves began to dream the same dream. A narrow passage. Walls breathing gently. Hands brushing the dirt, guided by something deeper. They woke with soil under their fingernails. Nathaniel's name was whispered again, but not like a memory. Like a warning. Because whatever that tunnel connected to, it wasn't created by him. He had only found the entrance, and finished what had been interrupted long before the plantation ever existed. The earth had not been hollowed out. It had been reopened, and it was learning the shape of human footsteps again. After Nathaniel Reed vanished, the plantation became very careful with numbers. Officially, no one else went missing. That's what the records say. Inventory lists, church logs, births and deaths written in clean ink by steady hands. According to paper, life continued exactly as it always had. But the ground kept count. It started small. A woman sent to fetch water who never came back. A boy told to sleep in the tool shed who was gone by morning. An old man whose bed was still warm, blanket folded back like he had simply stood up and walked away. No screams, no signs of struggle, just absence. The overseer blamed the woods. The master blamed rebellion. The preacher blamed sin. Each explanation pushed the fear somewhere else, anywhere but down. Yet people began avoiding certain places without knowing why. The area behind the church, the far edge of the tobacco fields, the patch of land where the soil always looked darker, looser, freshly turned no matter how often it was packed down. Animals refused to cross it. Horses reared. Chickens scattered. Dogs pulled against their leashes, whining, tails low, eyes locked on the ground, as if something beneath was moving just out of sight. At night, those who slept closest to the church reported vibrations through the floor. Not strong enough to wake the whole house, just enough to keep someone half dreaming, half alert, heart racing for reasons they couldn't explain. Some heard footsteps pacing below. Others heard voices. Not loud, not clear, but familiar. A woman swore she heard her son calling her name from beneath the floorboards, his voice calm, patient, as if asking her to come join him. She never slept there again. The preacher began locking the church at night, then sleeping inside it. He said he was guarding the Lord's house. What he was really doing was listening. One evening, he wrote a single sentence in the church ledger, then tore the page out and burned it. A servant later found the ashes and swore the words had been, "They are not dead. They are being gathered." By the end of that year, the plantation felt hollow, like something essential had been removed, leaving behind routines without purpose. People moved slower, spoke less, avoided eye contact with the earth beneath their feet, because deep down, everyone understood the same thing. Nathaniel Reed had not disappeared alone. He had shown the ground how to take, and the ground was learning fast. The first map was found on a body. It was winter when they discovered him, one of the men sent months earlier to work in the far fields. His body lay near the tree line, half buried, as if the earth had tried to take him and changed its mind. He was thin, too thin. His eyes were open, staring at nothing. But it was his back that made everyone step away. Beneath torn skin and dried blood, there were lines carved into his flesh. Not random wounds, not torture. They were precise, deliberate, and curved in familiar shapes, spirals, angles, branching paths. It was the tunnel, a map of it. The preacher said it was blasphemy. The overseer said it was madness. But the slaves recognized the symbols immediately. They were the same ones Nathaniel had carved under the church. The man hadn't escaped. He hadn't wandered. He had been returned. After that, more bodies appeared. Not many, just enough to make a pattern undeniable. Each one marked. Each one closer to the church than the last. And every map was different. Longer, deeper. The tunnels were growing. Those who touched the carvings said they could feel something moving beneath their fingers, like a pulse traveling along the lines. Some claimed they saw flashes, dark spaces opening, closing, like blinking eyes made of dirt. The master ordered the bodies burned. But even fire couldn't erase everything. Ashes settled into the soil around the church, darkening it further. And when it rained, the ground absorbed them too quickly, as if eager. Nathaniel's name stopped being spoken aloud. People began dreaming of him differently now. Not as a man, but as a shape moving ahead of them in narrow spaces. Always just out of reach. Always leading them downward. One woman said she woke up standing barefoot at the edge of the dark patch behind the fields, dirt packed under her nails, her hands sore like she had been digging for hours. She had no memory of leaving her bed. That was when they realized something worse than the disappearances. The tunnel didn't just take people. It called them. And whatever lived beneath the plantation had learned how to speak using familiar voices, familiar faces, familiar pain. Nathaniel Reed had given it a language. And it was fluent now. The preacher decided to confront it. Not with tools, not with men, but with words. On a Sunday heavy with heat, he gathered everyone into the church. Masters, slaves, children, elders. He locked the doors from the inside. Said no one would leave until the truth was spoken aloud. His sermon was unlike anything he had ever given. He spoke of foundations, of sins buried so deep they shaped the ground itself, of faith built on stolen land and stolen lives, pressed down until the earth could no longer hold it quietly. People shifted in their seats. Some cried. Some stared at the floor, afraid it might open. Then the church shook. Just once. A low tremor that rattled teeth and set the bell swaying without sound. The preacher froze. He placed his hand on the pulpit and whispered something not meant for the congregation. A prayer, maybe, or an apology. That was when the floor behind the altar cracked open. Not wide, not violently, just enough. Warm air rose from the gap, carrying the smell of turned soil and something older, something like damp stone that had never seen light. A voice came from below, clear, calm. Nathaniel. The preacher dropped to his knees. He began to sob, not in fear, but in recognition. He said he had heard that voice before. Years ago, in dreams, in moments of doubt. It was the voice that told him some things were better buried. The floor split wider. Hands reached up, black with dirt, fingers steady, patient. The congregation screamed. The doors were forced open. People fled into the sunlight, trampling hymns underfoot. By the time anyone returned, the church was quiet again. The crack was gone. The pulpit was empty. The preacher was never found. Only his Bible remained, open to a page where the margins were filled with unfamiliar symbols. Tunnels, leading down, leading inward, leading nowhere the living were meant to go. From that day on, the church was abandoned. But beneath it, something new had taken its place. A congregation that never needed light and never stopped listening. The children noticed it before the adults did. They always do. At first, it showed up in drawings. Charcoal sketches on scraps of wood. Shapes traced in dirt with sticks. Circles inside circles. Long lines that curved downward and ended in small squares. Doors. When asked what they were drawing, the children all gave the same answer, even though none of them spoke together. Where we go at night. The adults told them to stop. Took the drawings away. Burned some. Buried others. But the images kept coming back. Etched into fence posts, scratched into bed frames, pressed into soft clay near the riverbank. One child said the doors were warm. Another said they opened by themselves if you stood still long enough. None of the children remembered walking there. They only remembered waking up with dirt on their feet and a heavy feeling in their chest, like they had been holding their breath for a very long time. Parents started tying bells to door handles, locking windows, sleeping in shifts. It didn't matter. The children weren't leaving through doors. They were being met. One night, a woman followed her daughter after pretending to fall asleep. She watched the girl sit up slowly, eyes open but empty, and walk toward the old church without shoes, without fear. The ground behind the altar softened under her feet. Not collapsed. Opened. The woman ran forward screaming her child's name. The girl turned once and said something in a voice that wasn't hers. He said, "You're too loud." Then she stepped down. By morning, the ground was smooth again. The girl's bed was cold. After that, the children who remained stopped drawing doors. They began drawing rooms. Wide ones, filled with people standing shoulder to shoulder, faces calm, eyes closed, hands pressed to the walls like they were listening to something deep inside the earth. At the center of every drawing was the same figure. A man bent slightly forward, hands dirty, eyes lowered. Nathaniel Reed was no longer leading them away. He was welcoming them in. And the ground beneath the plantation was no longer empty. It was filling up. The master's house was never meant to hear the ground. It was built to rise above it. Wide floors, thick beams, stone laid heavy, meant to press the land flat and keep it quiet. But by the second year after Nathaniel disappeared, the house began to change its habits. Floors creaked in patterns. Not random, not age. At night, slow groans moved from one end of the house to the other, like weight shifting below, step by step. Servants said it sounded like someone pacing beneath the boards, careful not to wake anyone. The master began sleeping in a different room every few nights. He said the walls whispered. Not words, at first. Just pressure. A feeling that grew stronger the longer he stayed still. Like the house wanted him to lie flat. To press his ear to the floor the way Nathaniel used to. One night, he did. He told no one this. But later, in a letter never sent, he wrote that the ground spoke in memories. Not accusations. Not anger. Just facts. Names. Dates. Bodies placed where no markers stood. He heard his father's voice. Then his grandfather's. Then voices he didn't recognize, but somehow knew had been there longer than the house, longer than the fields, longer than the church. After that night, the master stopped eating. He walked the halls barefoot, listening. Servants noticed dirt beneath his nails. Cracks appeared in the cellar walls. Thin at first, then branching, always downward, always curving toward the old church grounds. The house wasn't sinking. It was leaning in. One evening, a servant saw the master standing in the cellar, candle in hand, staring at a place where the wall had opened just enough to show darkness beyond brick and soil. The servant asked if he needed help. The master answered without turning around. "It knows my name now." The next morning, the master was gone. No horse taken. No note left. Just a single footprint in the cellar dirt, bare, pressed deep, facing the wall. By the end of that week, the house fell silent. But beneath it, something shifted again. The ground had learned another voice. Another story. Another reason to keep opening its doors. Years later, long after the plantation was abandoned, someone went back. In 1874, a traveling surveyor named Elias Moore was hired to assess the land for sale. The Civil War had passed. The buildings stood half-rotted, swallowed by vines and silence. Locals warned him not to camp near the old church. They said the ground there wasn't finished. Moore didn't listen. On his second night, his instruments picked up something strange. The ground beneath the church registered hollow, not like a cellar or grave, but like a system. Layered, extensive, deliberate. Curiosity won. He broke through the church floor. What he found beneath the altar wasn't a tunnel. It was a room. Wide. Circular. The walls carved smooth, etched with hundreds of names. Men, women, children. Dates that spanned decades, some reaching back before the plantation was built. At the center sat a ledger. Bound in skin, not leather. Human. The pages were filled with handwriting that shifted style every few lines, as if written by many hands sharing the same body. Moore recognized some names from old property records. Nathaniel Reed's name appeared again and again, but never as a death. Always as a witness. The final pages weren't names. They were instructions. How to listen. How to dig without waking the wrong things. How to open the ground and let it remember. Moore ran. He sealed the church as best he could and reported the land as unstable, unfit for development. The sale was canceled. The area was quietly avoided. Moore died 3 months later. His body was found miles away, hands raw, fingernails torn, dirt in his mouth. Carved into his back was a new map, longer than any before, because the tunnels hadn't stopped growing. They were just waiting for someone else to finish reading. By 1890, a town had grown near the old plantation. Not on top of it. Near it. That distance mattered. Everyone felt it, even if no one said it out loud. The streets curved slightly away from the church ruins. Houses avoided certain lines of ground, leaving strange gaps where nothing would stay built. People told themselves it was coincidence. It wasn't. The town elders knew the stories. Their parents had whispered them. Their grandparents had lived them. But the rule was simple. Never dig too deep, and never ask why the soil was warm in winter. A schoolhouse was built on the edge of the old fields. Children complained the floors hummed during quiet lessons. Teachers said it was pipes. There were no pipes. A well was dug in 1897. It had to be abandoned after 3 days. The water came up cloudy, smelling of damp earth and iron. And voices. Faint, layered, like echoes stacked on top of each other. One man swore he heard his own voice calling back at him from the bucket. The well was filled in overnight. No marker. No explanation. Churches in the town avoided sermons about foundations. About burial. About resurrection. Those words made people uneasy. They preferred hymns about light. About rising up. Still, people went missing. Not often enough to cause panic. Just often enough to be folded into excuses. Travel. Illness. Leaving town for work. Families were told not to ask questions if they wanted to stay. The ground behind the old plantation remained untouched. Overgrown. Quiet. Too quiet. On warm nights, townsfolk claimed they could feel vibrations through their floors, slow, patient movements, like something adjusting itself beneath them. No one called it tunnels, but everyone dreamed of doors. And in those dreams, there was always a man standing ahead in the dark, head bowed, hands dirty, waiting for them to remember why the ground had opened in the first place. In 1912, the town made its worst decision. They built an orphanage. It sat just far enough from the old church ruins to feel safe, but close enough that the land was cheaper. No one admitted why the land was cheaper. They said it was charity. They said it was God's will. The children arrived thin, quiet, already used to listening. The first winter, the caretakers noticed how well the children slept. Too well. No nightmares. No crying. No fear of the dark. They lay still for hours, breathing slow and deep, as if matching a rhythm beneath the floor. One caretaker said the building felt like it was floating at night. The children began drawing again. Not doors this time. Staircases. Downward. Always downward. When asked where the stairs led, the children said the same thing the plantation children had said nearly a century earlier. Home. Some of the children started waking with dirt under their nails. Others complained of sore hands, as if they'd been gripping rough walls in their sleep. A boy developed a habit of pressing his ear to the floor before bed. He said it helped him feel less alone. The head matron reported hearing singing under the orphanage at night. Low, wordless, comforting, like a lullaby sung by many voices breathing together. When the first child disappeared, the town called it a runaway. When the second vanished, they blamed the river. By the fifth, the matron stopped reporting it at all. She had begun sleeping on the floor of her office, ear pressed to the boards, listening to names she recognized from intake forms. One night, she followed the sound. The basement floor had softened. Not broken. Opened. She stood at the edge for a long time. Witnesses later said she smiled before stepping down. The orphanage closed quietly in 1919. No investigation. No records transferred. The building was demolished. But the ground beneath it remained warm. And whatever lived below had learned a new thing. Children listen better than adults. And they never forget the way home feels. When the Great War ended, men came home changed. Some to this town. They carried memories they couldn't explain and silences they couldn't fill. The ground recognized them immediately. Veterans complained of feeling watched while they slept, of waking up with their ears pressed to the floor without remembering moving. One man said the earth felt familiar, like a trench that never ended. He wasn't wrong. During the 1920s, construction crews were hired to modernize the town. New roads, deeper foundations, progress. Every crew that dug near the old plantation quit within days. They reported the same things. Tools vibrating in their hands, shovels sinking too easily, soil that shifted back into place when they looked away. One man claimed he broke through into open space and heard breathing all around him, not echoing, close. The town council sealed the site, declared it protected land. No digging, no questions, but the veterans kept walking there at night, drawn by something they couldn't name. One was found sitting at the edge of the old church grounds, hands bloody, smiling faintly. He said he finally understood why the war felt familiar. Down there, he whispered, no one pretends it's over. By the time the Depression hit, the town was already hollow. People left when they could. Those who stayed learned how to listen without reacting, how to ignore the way the ground seemed to settle differently after every disappearance. The tunnels didn't care about history. They absorbed it. Every trauma, every unmarked grave, every lie pressed into soil and covered with prayer. Nathaniel Reed's name appeared again in a WPA survey from 1936, scratched into the margin by an unknown hand. Witness still present. The war couldn't bury what was already beneath everything. It only taught it new ways to wait. And it waited, patient, listening, for the next generation to forget why the ground was never meant to be opened again. In 1948, the town held a meeting it never recorded. No minutes, no signatures, no official location. Just a gathering of people who had lived long enough to know the land was running out of patience. They met in the schoolhouse after dark. The topic was simple. The ground was louder now. Vibrations had grown stronger. Cellars cracked. Wells went dry overnight. People woke up standing in fields with no memory of how they got there. A child claimed the dirt outside his window whispered his full name. First, middle, last, slowly, like it was tasting it. Someone suggested digging everything up and sealing it properly. That idea died immediately, because everyone in that room knew the truth, even if they had never said it aloud before. You don't dig into something that is listening. That same night, the ground answered back. At exactly 2:17 a.m., every dog in town began to howl. Not barking, howling, long and panicked, like they were mourning something still alive. Then came the sound, a deep, rolling pressure beneath the earth, traveling outward from the old plantation grounds. Not an explosion, not a collapse, a shift. Houses rattled, windows flexed, People fell out of bed as if pushed by invisible hands. Those closest to the site swore they heard words forming inside the sound. Not spoken, but shaped. Names. Hundreds of them. By morning, a new depression had formed where the church once stood. Wide. Smooth. Intentional. At its center was a single footprint. Bare. Facing downward. No one filled it in. No one fenced it off. People avoided looking at it too long, because the longer you stared, the more it felt like the ground was staring back, waiting for recognition. From that day on, the town changed its behavior. They stopped pretending the land was neutral. They walked carefully. They listened when the ground went quiet. And they taught their children one rule above all others. Never answer if you hear your name coming from below. Because once the ground knows you're listening, it never stops talking to you. In 1952, a woman arrived who didn't belong to the town. Her name was Margaret Hale, an archivist sent by the state to catalog forgotten records, land deeds, church registries, death notices that never made it into official books. She believed history could be cleaned, organized, put back in order. The town let her work. That was their mistake. Margaret noticed patterns almost immediately. Gaps in census years. Repeated surnames that vanished and reappeared decades later. Entire families that seemed to dissolve without explanation. And always, the same parcel of land marked undeveloped for over a century. She asked about it. People changed the subject. She visited the site herself. The ground was warm. Margaret began spending nights in the records room, piecing together fragments others had learned to ignore. Slave inventories, church ledgers, WPA notes. A child's drawing pressed between two brittle pages, circles, lines, doors. At the center of it all was one name. Nathaniel Reed. He appeared nowhere he should, and everywhere he shouldn't. Not as property, not as deceased, but referenced, witnessed, noted in margins, scribbled by different hands across different eras. Margaret dreamed of tunnels before she ever found them. In the dreams, she wasn't afraid. She felt guided, like someone ahead of her knew exactly how far she could go without breaking. She followed the feeling one night. The depression where the church once stood had deepened slightly over the years. Not visibly, but perceptibly. The ground there felt thinner, like paper stretched too tight. Margaret knelt, pressed her ear to the soil, and heard breathing. Slow, steady, layered. She whispered a name without meaning to. Nathaniel. The ground shifted, not opening, inviting. Margaret returned to her room and burned her notes. All of them. She left town before sunrise without filing a report. Months later, a final document arrived at the state office, and signed, undated. It contained one sentence. Some histories are not meant to be recovered, because they are still happening. Margaret Hale never worked as an archivist again. But sometimes, in quiet rooms, she swore she could still feel the floor breathing, waiting for her to listen again. By the mid-1950s, the town no longer appeared on some maps. Not erased, just softened. Roads curved around it without explanation. New highways avoided the area entirely. Gas stations and motels stopped appearing within miles. Like progress itself felt the wrongness and quietly stepped aside. Those who stayed learned how to live with absence. Empty houses weren't questioned. Rooms were sealed instead of cleaned. Names were spoken carefully, if at all. People stopped asking where someone went and started asking when, because sometimes the ground gave them back in pieces. Old objects, familiar voices in dreams, a handprint appearing in dust where no one had stood. The depression where the church once stood deepened every year. Not sinking, growing. Grass refused to take root there. Rain never pooled. Snow melted faster, as if warmth rose steadily from below. At night, lights could be seen far underground. Not reflections. Movement. The town doctor wrote in his private journal that people were changing. Not disappearing, but thinning. Like they were slowly being listened out of existence. Patients complained of losing memories that felt heavy. Painful. Ancestral. They felt relief. That frightened him more than fear ever could. One elderly woman said it best before she vanished. The ground isn't angry, she said. It's full. By 1958, only a handful of families remained. They no longer locked their doors. They no longer slept in beds. Most chose the floor, ear pressed down, listening, waiting for the moment the ground would decide they were ready. Because everyone left understood the final truth Nathaniel Reed had uncovered long ago. The land was never haunted. It was burdened. and once it learned how to open, it would never stop making room. By 1961, only one house still showed light after sunset. It stood at the edge of town, farthest from the old plantation, but still close enough to feel the ground breathe at night. A yellow glow leaked through thin curtains, trembling slightly, like the house itself was unsure it should still be awake. Inside lived the Carter family. 3 generations. They had stayed not out of faith, not out of denial, but out of debt. The land was worth nothing. Leaving meant losing everything. Staying meant learning the rules. They never built a cellar. They never drove nails too deep. They never spoke names of the missing after dark. The youngest, a boy named Samuel, broke the rules without knowing it. He was born quiet, not sick, not slow, just listening. As an infant, he slept best on the floor. As a toddler, he pressed his palms to the ground like he was feeling for warmth through skin. By age 7, he began describing places no one had shown him. Long passages, wide rooms, people standing still, shoulder to shoulder, eyes closed. Not dead, not alive, just present. He said they were resting. The Carters tried to leave after that. Their car wouldn't start. They packed anyway. That night, the ground knocked back. 3 slow knocks. From beneath the house. Samuel sat up in bed and smiled. He says it's almost time, he whispered. The parents didn't ask who he was. They already knew. The next morning, the house was empty. No signs of struggle. No notes. Just 3 impressions in the dirt outside the front door, bare feet, pressed deep, all facing the same direction, toward the old church grounds. By nightfall, the house went dark. For good. And the town, at last, had no witnesses left above ground. In 1967, the state officially declared the town uninhabitable. No ceremony. No explanation. Just a quiet reclassification on a map, a line drawn through a name that had already begun to fade. Nature reclaimed the buildings quickly. Roofs collapsed. Walls sank. Roads cracked and disappeared under weeds. But the ground did not heal. Hikers who wandered too close reported strange sensations. Sudden dizziness. Pressure in the ears. The feeling of being watched from below rather than around. Some said their footsteps echoed wrong. Too deep, too slow, like the earth was repeating them back with a delay. Surveyors avoided the area. So did animals. In the late 1970s, a group of college students tried to camp near the site, unaware of its history. They left before midnight, shaking, unable to explain why they felt like something beneath them was counting their breaths. One student later admitted he heard a voice in the dirt under his sleeping bag. Not threatening, not angry, patient. It asked him to lie flatter. The depression where the church once stood had widened. The soil there looked smooth, almost cared for, like hands had passed over it again and again. Occasionally, after heavy rain, shapes appeared briefly on the surface. Lines, curves, the faint outline of doors. Then they were gone. No one ever found an entrance, because entrances were no longer needed. Whatever existed below no longer waited to be uncovered. It had learned how to reach upward, how to listen through layers of time, how to call softly enough that only the tired, the curious, and the forgotten would hear. And they always did, because the ground remembers every step ever taken on it. And sometimes, it asks for company. Just 3 impressions in the dirt outside the front door, bare feet, pressed deep, all facing the same direction, toward the old church grounds. By nightfall, the house went dark. For good. And the town, at last, had no witnesses left above ground. In 1967, the state officially declared the town uninhabitable. No ceremony. No explanation. Just a quiet reclassification on a map, a line drawn through a name that had already begun to fade. Nature reclaimed the buildings quickly. Roofs collapsed. Walls sank. Roads cracked and disappeared under weeds. But the ground did not heal. Hikers who wandered too close reported strange sensations. Sudden dizziness. Pressure in the ears. The feeling of being watched from below rather than around. Some said their footsteps echoed wrong. Too deep, too slow, like the earth was repeating them back with a delay. Surveyors avoided the area. So did animals. In the late 1970s, a group of college students tried to camp near the site, unaware of its history. They left before midnight, shaking, unable to explain why they felt like something beneath them was counting their breaths. One student later admitted he heard a voice in the dirt under his sleeping bag. Not threatening, not angry, patient. It asked him to lie flatter. The depression where the church once stood had widened. The soil there looked smooth, almost cared for, like hands had passed over it again and again. Occasionally, after heavy rain, shapes appeared briefly on the surface. Lines, curves, the faint outline of doors. Then they were gone. No one ever found an entrance, because entrances were no longer needed. Whatever existed below no longer waited to be uncovered. It had learned how to reach upward, how to listen through layers of time, how to call softly enough that only the tired, the curious, and the forgotten would hear. And they always did, because the ground remembers every step ever taken on it. And sometimes, it asks for company. If you ever pass through a place where the air feels heavy for no reason, if the soil seems warm when it shouldn't be, if you feel the urge to slow down, to stand still, to listen, that's not imagination. That's history pressing back. Places like the Reed Plantation still exist. Not on maps, not in textbooks. They exist in the quiet gaps between roads, in land no one builds on twice, in towns that shrink without explanation. The ground remembers what people refuse to carry. It remembers names never written down, prayers whispered into dirt, hands that dug not for escape, but for acknowledgement. Sometimes, late at night, people swear they hear 3 slow knocks beneath their homes. They tell themselves it's pipes. They tell themselves it's settling. They tell themselves it's nothing. But deep down, they already know. The land is not asking for fear. It is asking for witnesses. Nathaniel Reed was one. So were the ones who followed. So are you. Every time you listen to stories like this and feel that quiet weight settle in your chest. Because remembering is a form of listening. And listening, in places like that, is never passive. So if you ever feel the ground listening back, do not answer aloud. Do not dig. Do not lie down and press your ear to the earth, no matter how strong the pull feels. Because some doors were never meant to be opened again. And some stories are still being told, beneath your feet.